Thank you very much for this warm welcome. I knew from the agenda that I would be the last of the keynote speakers, and I knew that Carsten Spohr would speak before me. And Carsten, as you've seen, is a great speaker, but he always speaks a little bit longer. So I condensed. I put my long speech away, Carsten, and condensed it into one page. Well, first of all, Mr. Rocholl, Dieter Zetsche, thank you very much for inviting. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to commend you for what you have done with ESMT over, what is it now, 15 years. Dieter Zetsche was just giving the latest data on the rankings of ESMT, and I'm very much looking forward to, again, cooperate even closer with you in the future. It's a pleasure to share this podium here with two distinguished colleagues. Carsten was reminding us of their very respectable engineering degrees. I wasn't sure I should reveal this to you, but I only studied economics, history, and political science, and yet you can become the CEO of Airbus. and be invited to talk about technology. I will try my very best here. By the way, Carsten, when you were saying making the world better, reminded me of a famous quote of Bill Gates, who once said, "International aviation was the first worldwide web, connecting people throughout the continents." And I think we both take pride in the fact also that we're here talking on mobility, but that this morning is so much dedicated to aviation at the same time. Technologically speaking, ladies and gentlemen, we're living in an exciting world. Dieter Zetsche made reference to that. For entrepreneurs, for innovators, we all know certain technologies are currently going, or some, at least in the Silicon Valley, call exponential. And certainly the use of data and the exploitation of data is going exponential. And we in aerospace, in aeronautics and space, will particularly benefit from that. Why? Because we're an enormously data-rich industry. Plus, there is the convergence of certain technological trends. Carsten, you're right. I wouldn't say digitalization is not a technology. It's an enabler. It's the fuel for these technologies. The convergence, and I think when you mentioned Dieter, three of them are relevant for us as well. Automation and robotics, autonomy, connectivity, machine learning, artificial intelligence. These are all things, electrification, very important, all things that are important for aviation in the future as well. And these are converging, and digitalization is providing the fuel, the boost for this convergence and for this acceleration. I should also mention new materials. And we see that on the latest aircraft, more than 50% carbon fiber materials and other lightweight materials, morphing materials, stuff like that. All that is the stuff for an exciting journey in aerospace. I have to tell you, I mean, a young state secretary here in Berlin was criticized a couple of weeks ago because she had been talking about flying cars. And there were plenty of comments in the newspaper ridiculing the state secretary for talking about flying cars as if this would be science fiction far away or not at all realistic. Flying cars are realistic. When we're talking mobility, urban mobility, the ground mobility will soon close with the air mobility. We have urban air mobility today. It's called helicopters. But the conventional helicopter is expensive. The conventional helicopter is noisy, and I won't talk about safety, but it's certainly not at the same rate as large commercial aircraft. And this is why the use of conventional helicopters is very limited. But today, with these technologies, particularly autonomy and electrification, we can build flying cars. I was just a couple of days ago in Oregon, where we have a test range where we are testing right now one of our two projects in this area. And it's very exciting. This one, by the way, was conceptualized and implemented so far by our innovation center in Silicon Valley. We have another one in Bavaria. These things will become reality, at least from a technology point of view. Regulation might be a little bit tougher. Technology point of view in the next 5 to 10 years, absolutely sure. We're working with Siemens. I saw Roland Busch here in the first row on electrification. It's a great partnership because this is not just for the flying cars or for the helicopters, but for large commercial aircraft eventually. We hope, Roland, I think that in 15 years or so, we should be able to propel, at least in a hybrid mode, 100-seaters, 100-seat passenger aircraft by electrification. We're building a test facility in Munich and partnering with other distinguished companies. I think we can say that, Rolls-Royce. That's another very important element of what we're doing. We are very data rich, I mentioned that. Just to give you an idea, the latest A350 has 250,000 sensors on board. We can measure 900,000 system parameters. Only a fraction of those will be transmitted, but we're currently installing on all planes a data capture and data transmitter entity with which we can transmit a huge amount of these data to the ground, more or less in real time. And that will have tremendous consequences, Carsten, for our customers, for the airlines, because it should make our aircraft much more reliable. A extraordinary aircraft on the ground, as you say, aircraft on the ground, AOG, out of maintenance schedule, so to say, we should be able to avoid in some years because we can predict the failure and go through maintenance, etc. So there's a lot we're doing here. One thing we've done, and maybe that is a bit of a conceptual or philosophical lessons learned. We have, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago only, seriously started the digitalization journey. And we focused very much initially, and do still, on advanced data analytics because of the data richness. But we did that by jumping into the cold water, by selecting a partner. It's known, famous Palantir, because they were and they are, in my opinion, the best data analytics company in the world. And what we did not do, what unfortunately I observe as a European company, and not just a German company, many companies do in Germany, politicians, develop first of all the big Gesamtkonzept that covers all aspects, including ethical issues, and you have ethical commissions and so on and so on. But when you're ready with your Gesamtkonzept, the competition has moved ahead and is miles ahead. So I think in this fast-moving environment in which we're in, going exponential, what is very important is to throw a stone into the pond, go after the ripples, and then be very pragmatic. That's, by the way the Americans mostly do it. Experiment, and then find out what you can do. And then, later on, think about regulation if that is necessary, and not start the whole thing or try to cover all aspects. I say in Airbus's case it has worked. We have built a big platform, an open aviation platform, where we have downloaded already, what is it? I need to look at it. Petabytes of data. That's obviously much more than gigabytes. Petabytes of data. And this is increasing. We have thousands of aircraft connected already, and we will do more of it as well. Let me come to one aspect that is important, or two aspects. Basically stuff that I thought about this morning in the plane. We're currently pretty much all dependent on US technology. If we look at our private e-activities and I-activities and iPhones and iPads and what we're doing, I saw a figure recently that for Europeans, Germans, more than 90%, sometimes 96% is US technology. I'm sure these days a lot of entrepreneurs, decision makers will think about that, as we have a trade war looming at least. I think we all hope that the big trade conflict does not happen with our long-term partner, the United States of America, but it could. How could such a conflict possibly escalate? And could it encompass also access to these technologies? As long as steel and aluminum, well, at least I can say for my industry, the consequences are limited. But what about high tech? What about internet access, et cetera, et cetera? And then, yes, we have an alternative, China. The Chinese are catching up very rapidly. Their investment, particularly into artificial intelligence, is amazing. But shouldn't Europe be in a position to have some of our own capabilities in place? And not just on the defensive side, not just in cybersecurity. We tend to be good on defense in Europe. The new data, what is it, GDPR, I only know the English word, the Datenschutzverordnung. I don't know whether some of you heard or read what Peter Thiel was saying here in Berlin a couple of nights ago. Well, Peter is sometimes a little bit extreme in his views. And when he says that this GDPR is the much more incompetent version of Chinese internet censorship, maybe that's a bit on the edge. But it should make us think, who is benefiting from that? Who is suffering from that? Suffering will certainly be companies, and particularly startups, because it's an administrative, let's not be extreme, challenge, a big administrative challenge. So we're good in defense in Europe, but we're not playing offense, and I think that is very important. And I would like to conclude on that and say what is important is that governments particularly look at infrastructure. Don't make Gesamtkonzepts. That's not their job. Infrastructure, it starts with education. And I think both speakers before me mentioned that. The human factor, the human resource, how important that is. We're getting into some impasse in some areas already. All of our companies have massive reskilling training programs, hiring programs for new skills on the way. The World Economic Forum found out a couple of years ago, or predicted, not found out, it's prediction, that for those children who go into grammar school right now, 2/3 of the occupations that they will eventually take on are not yet invented. So we're here also talking about a really exponential trend. Governments should look after connectivity, 5G. Why should Europe be the last one introducing 5G? Can't we accelerate that? Networks, artificial intelligence, everybody speaks about it nowadays in Europe, but look how fragmented the picture is. The European Commission is doing a little bit. The French have a dedicated budget. The Germans creating centers, very much fragmented. And, you know, from my industry, but also because we are mostly not conscious about it, space. Are we aware how dependent we are on space, on satellites, on access to space? Also in that area, the European position should not be taken for granted. Elon Musk is not just disrupting the electrical car business, or is trying, probably unsuccessfully, but he's doing the same thing with space. Ladies and gentlemen, I stop here. These were just a couple of thoughts to complement what the previous speakers have said, and thank you very much again for the honor to invite me to this wonderful forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these great impressions and also very strong and very clear statements. The one aspect that I find very fascinating is the amount of data that are collected. And when we think about data analytics, often what we have mostly in mind is B2C. here, and that might be actually a race which we may have lost against other parts of the world. Now, thinking about what you're describing about the B2B data, would this be a way in which Europe could actually have an edge and really try to compete more efficiently?
Well, I know when I'm talking about that, I mean, the platform we are building is a worldwide platform. It's not a European platform. I have to admit, Airbus would be that big if we only had European customers. Even for Lufthansa is, of course, by far the biggest. It helps to see you in the first row, Carsten. You know? This for me is not an example, but I mean, when we decided that we have to go into this, and we are largely in a duopoly today. You might think duopolies have certain advantages. We have one big disadvantage. If one of the two duopolies comes up with a disruptive approach first, that can be very, very destabilizing for a duopoly. So we are in a bloody race with our competitor here. And when we said we need to focus on data analytics, we looked around and said, who's the best? And there was no European in the top league. And that, I think, is a dilemma for us as business people nowadays, very often. That, yes, there are promises, maybe in 5 years there will be something, but we have to act here and now, because we're in a race with our competitors. So this probably, I mean, yes, if there were technologies coming up, Siemens might be helpful, Dassault, and you know, these are bits and pieces, but advanced data analytics, so far a domain by the Americans.
Maybe one related question on this. Certainly, obviously, Airbus is a company that shows that Europe can compete very successfully, can develop world market leaders. What is it that maybe other industries, other technologies can learn from you? What could they take and take as learnings for their own development?
Well, that's a good one. I should have come to that myself. That's a good one. I mean, the Airbus story would tell you never give up. I mean, when Airbus was created back in '69, by some forward-looking industrialists and politicians, it seemed to be impossible to stand up competition to the Americans. There were 3 big Americans at the time, Boeing, Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas. And most people would say, this is impossible, how will you do that? We did it. It took a while, but now we are kind of 50-50 with our big competitor. Then the Americans denied, more or less, access to space to the Europeans in the 70s. That gave birth to the Ariane Space. Now, Ariane has been a roaring success. It's now challenged by Elon Musk, but for many, many years has been a leader in commercial space from an impossible position at the time. So it is possible, but we are operating today, obviously, in an environment that moves much faster, is much more aggressive. And that, I think, is a big difference to developing things in the 60s and 70s. It's doable, never give up.
Thank you. This is actually, anyway, a good motto. Thank you very much, Mr. Einhaus.